ado, I'd like to introduce to you Curtis Olson. Going up. So welcome to the first ever Chamber on Tap with Shaw Television. We appreciate you coming, and we have a lot of guests here. Fantastic turnout. Thank you so much for coming, you guys. So Curtis, I was actually really excited about this night because out of all the guests that I've had, we've had some great guests. You more so, and I'm not trying to slight the other guests, but you have really made a footprint in Saskatoon. You've done a lot of revitalization in some areas. You've put a lot of work into the city itself, and really your business is based around Saskatoon and improving Saskatoon. I mean, that's in a nutshell, but we'll get to more details as we go. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you're born and raised in Saskatoon. You have 2 young boys. Your wife is equally as famous as you, Carrie Catherine.
She would say more famous.
I would too, but not to your face. Kidding, Carrie. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you? You're from Saskatoon, born and raised here. Tell us how you got started in the business of development.
Sure. So, like you said, born and raised in Saskatoon. Went to high school here, graduated, went right to university. After a couple of years in university, I realized that I was more interested in playing music and playing guitar than actually finishing off a degree. So I started a band, toured across Canada for about 3 years, recorded an album, and then when I realized that was a whole lot of fun, but I was ready to move on, I went back to university. In 2000, I did an engineering physics degree and convocated in 2004. Took a job with Vesima Networks, now as a business development engineer. And
did it die?
No, still working. I took a job as an engineer, worked for, at that time it was called VCOM, that was out in Victoria, on Vancouver Island, worked out there for about a year. After a year there, I realized that I had no interest in working as a strict engineer doing design work. My dad had come out and seen this great warehouse loft that my wife and I were living in, and he said, "Hey, you know what, your uncle and I just bought this warehouse building back in Saskatoon, and this is what we could do with it."
Hold on.
Yep.
Wrong one. Unplug the
Check. Yeah. And a few months after that, my dad said, "Hey, do you want to come back here and help us with this project?" So I left the job working in Victoria, came back to Saskatoon, helped my dad and my uncle Ian with converting the Fairbanks warehouse into the first kind of converted loft project in Saskatoon. That was completed late in 2005. At the end of that project, I said, "Man, this kind of work strikes a great chord with me. It's entrepreneurial because it is, it's a great investment and great business enterprise. It's technically challenging because I was, negotiating with architects and engineers and city permitting officials arguing over the building code, which is, seems to be my favorite pastime. And it was completely creative, and I could carve my own destiny out of doing development projects. So on the creative side, doing development is tapping into that musician side in me. And so I realized that I better just start my own company and start doing my own things. So after that, I've done a handful of, started doing small projects, and every project keeps getting a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. And this year, we finished, we're just wrapping up 2 projects. One is a housing project with a dozen really modern townhouse condos in Riversdale that are all sold, and 11 of the 12 are occupied, 1 more to go next week. And we've done a couple of commercial renovations there, created a place called the 220, which is this wonderful building filled with, I think I have 45 offices and studios, about 130 people that use the building day in, day out, small businesses. It's a real hub of entrepreneurship and startup, all fueled by espresso in the middle of the building. That's where my company is located, is in the midst of this complete chaos, really. And we're just finishing, bought a building next door, and we're just finishing a renovation on that. And yeah, I suppose just continuing to build out, in my mind, very interesting and innovative projects in Saskatoon, but they're all happening in Riversdale right now, because I've found that that is the neighborhood that has really, it's a neighborhood that is a great, it has really embraced the things that I want to build, and there's an unbelievable opportunity in that area to build a really interesting neighborhood in the city right now. So that's, you know, the last 10 years of my life in a nutshell.
Oh, there you go. Well, and I apologize for the technical difficulties we have with the mic. Our budget with Shaw Cable is $5. So for the two of you at home watching this, we really apologize for the one mic that we're passing back and forth. But so you touch base on it. You have a real entrepreneurial gene, and the 220 building. I know even Essence Recruitment is one of your tenants there. There's some studios in the basement that have I've gone down and snuck in. Listen to Wyatt. Hey, Wyatt's recording. Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. So you've really revitalized that area, but where does this entrepreneurial gene come from? I know you alluded to it. Did it come from your dad? How did this all start for you?
You know, it's funny. I think it came from both my mom and dad, although, you know, on paper it doesn't quite look like it, because my dad worked for Crown Corp. He was with Sask Power for maybe 15 years, and then Sask Energy for 10 years, and then Sask Power for another 10 years. But he is a very creative and very driven guy, and he, no matter at what point of my life, there were always side businesses and side projects that we had at home. I mean, if it was as simple as my dad saying, "No, I'm not going to buy you a trampoline. Go out and get a paper route and figure out how to finance the purchase of that trampoline. You pay him $30 a month until you own it." It was things like that I was taught growing up. I mean, we had a little family business that we had for Northern Telecom for a while. And, you know, I suppose my dad has a real eye for opportunity. Maybe too much so at times, but he's a real, both my mom and dad have a real, you know, belief that you can make things happen. And if you pour enough persistence and effort into it, you can bring ideas to life, which I think is the real, you know, whether it's the beauty or the burden of being an entrepreneur. Sometimes you're a little too bullheaded and think you can bring anything to life, and you just make work for yourself along the way. So, but no, it definitely comes from them and my upbringing.
My dad didn't make my life as simple as you were saying, get a newspaper out. He said, go sell turkeys for the Hutterites. And I did, and it was good.
Yeah.
And I should say for the people watching at home, this cut on my chin, I was helping an old lady who was getting mugged while I was shaving. I thought, man, Shaw Cable's going to be here tonight. I better shave for them and get ready. And it was a hack job this morning. Could be worse. Yeah. I'm sure it could be worse. Oh well. So you've been now with your business for 5 years. Is that right?
Yep.
Seems to be a 5-year theme tonight. What? Now you were saying before we were talking that you're kind of at that place where you're just wrapping up 2 major projects, and now you and your family are able to take some time and relax and rest, which is fantastic. But what would you say in those 5 years have been some of the biggest struggles that you've faced? How did you deal with those, and what was the outcome of that for you?
Good question.
I think there was 3 in there.
Mm-hmm. I think I have this personality, right? That I believe if I pour enough energy at something, I can bring it to life. And when people say, oh, Riversdale, yeah, you won't be able to finance a property there, I say, whatever, I'll figure it out. People say, oh, you can renovate the building, but you'll never be able to lease it out, or you'll be able to lease it out for 1/4 of what rents are on the other side of Idlewild. I think that in the early years of the company, those were the biggest challenges I faced. And I think that being, in some ways, young and naive was a great asset to have. Because when I look back at some of the projects I've done and the starting points, specifically like the renovation of my house, which was an old grocery store, I look back at photos before we did any work on it and I think, oh man, what was I thinking? I don't know. I would never touch that project again.
Yeah.
But that was, I think that, being young and bold, that served me well. But the challenge, one of the biggest challenges that I've found, and I still actually deal with, is sometimes running into those roadblocks in perception. Because doing development and projects in an area like Riversdale, dealing with trades is not that bad. Dealing with, financing a property, it's a little more tricky, but you can do it. But dealing with some of the perceptions that come along with trying to lease out property in that neighborhood has been a real challenge. And in mine and my wife's opinion, and this is evidence of it is in the room, if you pour enough beer and wine at something, you can get people to show up. And that has been time and time again a strategy that we've had. When we had when we got to having like the grand opening of the 220, we didn't have it on the first day. I waited until the building was about half leased up, and then we had a huge party. And I said, okay, if we're gonna have an event, we better pour a lot of beer and wine at it and a lot of entertainment. And we had about 13 different performing groups there, from spoken word poetry to breakdancing to rock bands, and that had like red carpets out front and security, and we really went all out. I was nervous actually about spending that much money on an event, but it turns out that if you put enough wine and beer at something, people show up and they have great experiences, and they associate that with that block or that building or that street. And it's been a really good strategy for us. I mean, events like, I don't know if you've heard of Parking Day, but that was initiated by us as well and brought a huge crowd out to Riversdale for the last 2 years. And we're not changing. That's still the same strategy. So every time we have a new building or a new project, it always wraps up with, well, what's the party to celebrate it at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
Which makes for a good community and a lot of fun along the way.
Yeah, exactly. I even showed up for that party.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I don't show up to much because I'm a big deal, Shaw Cable. I am a big deal. I'm just kidding. So you talked about the area, and for those that aren't brand new to the city, the Riversdale area is kind of. I remember I moved here 9 years ago, and we did the tour with our real estate agent, and he did the classic real estate agent. You want to be on the east side. That's where you want to be. And I remember I pulled in to the party that you were talking about, the down at 220, and you park, and it's just right. It's right on the outskirts. The building is beautiful. You walk in, you feel like you're downtown. You don't feel like you're in something that a real estate agent will say, well, you want to avoid those areas. Now, you didn't just. That's not the only thing you've done in that area, in the Riversdale area. You said some condos and stuff. Where do you see the city of Saskatoon going? And from your perspective, where do you see the most opportunity for progress, for change, for development going forward?
This is part of my personality. Is I'm an urban guy. Since we've moved back to Saskatoon, for me personally, a lot of the decisions that we've made in terms of where we choose to live and where we choose to work and spend our days comes down to proximity. When we were looking for a house, I said, well, I want to be within a 5-minute walk of downtown, because we spend a lot of time downtown, whether it's restaurants or bars or cafes or whatever. That's why we bought the 220 where it is it's actually about 6 blocks away from my house. And I walked into work yesterday because I didn't want to start my car in -40. And when I think about the opportunities that I see in the city, I see hugely untapped potential in existing neighborhoods and existing areas, and Riversdale is actually the gold mine of all of that. Yeah. Because, like for me, when I walk down a street or drive through a neighborhood and I see a an order from the city condemning a property, to me that's usually a for sale sign, right? And I see an empty parking lot and I say, this is a great opportunity to do something interesting here. I see a building that's vacant and underutilized, I say, oh, what can we do with this building? And as a result, when I look at what the city is doing with things like infill development guidelines, the city administration has been doing great work to create good policy to allow redevelopment to happen, to allow us as a city to make better use of all these roads and neighborhoods that we've already built, served by existing fire stations and libraries and all that fun stuff. And to me, when I look at what's happening around River Landing, and in all of it's not just Riversdale, but all the neighborhoods that flank the downtown in those areas, there's an unbelievable opportunity for housing and for lifestyles that connect into the pulse of this city, which is something that I did not grow up with. When I grew up in Saskatoon, I lived way out on the west side, and for me, if we were going shopping, it was a 20-minute drive downtown and back again. And so I think that one of the big opportunities in an area where in some ways our city is just maturing a bit is that the urban fabric and the urban lifestyles that are afforded through neighborhoods like Broadway and Newtana around the university, City Park, Caswell Hill, Riversdale, there's an unbelievable opportunity there to have housing that's located right in close proximity to some of the best restaurants and bars like Hudson's, even and the riverbank and the amenities that are there. I think that we completely underutilize our riverbank, and it's one of the best. There aren't many cities that have what we have just 200 meters away from us right now.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, I've lived here for 10 years now, and it's my family and I have made roots here. We're established. We love this city. And you talked a bit about it. We are a former board of directors for the chamber. When I sat on there was Troy Davies. He's now a city councillor. Now you talked a little bit about the city. How have they approached you and other developers that are trying to do these landfills and trying to really revitalize those areas that, from if you just look at a map, you look, man, 5 minutes from the river, 5 minutes from downtown, this should be a perfect area. Mm-hmm. But really it hasn't been much longer than the last 5 years where we're really seeing a lot of activity. We see the market downtown, we see the, what's that building called? The incubating building. Ideas Inc. Incubating. Ideas Inc. building downtown. We've seen a lot of that progress, and then the 220. Now we're seeing like businesses like Shift Development, like you, we're making some changes and doing the landfills. How has the city approached you? Are they making your life easier? Are they helping you? Are they excited about this? Do they see the opportunities?
When I look back to that first project that I was helping my dad and my uncle with when I came back, that was the first warehouse to loft conversion. And what I saw then was the city administration wanted things to happen in the warehouse district, but when we actually got into the project, it was difficult. We were on a learning curve, but so was the city, and the city wasn't familiar with all of the realities and the challenges of doing a project or a conversion project like that. And over the last, about 7 years since we did that project, what I've seen is that the city has responded to the feedback that we've given to them, and that a lot of other developers, because I'm not the only one. I think of, specifically like Meridian Development that does some great infill projects. The city has been responsive to that feedback, and right now what's interesting is that the city is coming out with more, some financial incentives to make use of existing vacant lots or underutilized buildings or land, and they're doing something called the infill development guidelines, which again are trying to take it a step further. And I had a bit of an eye-opening experience. At the start of October, I went to Edmonton to speak at this Pecha Kucha event, and was talking to some developers there who we got to know, and I realized that Edmonton is at least a decade behind Saskatoon. And I didn't realize that. I thought we were just kind of, middle of the road doing what a bunch of other cities had already done, and we were trying to catch up. But it's not the case. Saskatoon has actually been very innovative and very progressive in balancing the emphasis of where development happens, and they're making it easier to deal with some of the obstacles that I've run into and that other developers have run into in urban areas. So there are some very good people working at the city, and it seems to get easier all the time. But that said, I wouldn't say dealing with the city is easy, because that's usually where I beat my head against the wall the hardest, is when I'm trying to get a permit issued for a project.
Yeah, the city sure makes it easy to pay parking tickets. But other than that, I try to park downtown and pay stuff. No, I'm just teasing.
Yeah.
I don't do any development, so I have no existing background to that. But you talked about the city, about your development, about your projects. Now, where do you see the city going, and the province for that fact? I mean, we've chatted before, you've toured in your band, you've seen Canada, you've seen what's going on. As a businessman, you've seen what other cities are up to. Where do you see not only Saskatoon, but our province, where do you see our strengths, and where do you see us going in the future?
Good question. I think that there's right now there's this unbelievable wind in our sails as a province that has brought a lot of optimism and really entrepreneurship to the province that didn't exist. It was funny, in that 1 year that I lived out in Victoria, in that 1 year absence that we had, when we came back, my wife and I noticed right away that there was a shift in people's opinions. And I think before that time, like around 2004 or earlier, if you said, hey, I'm a young guy, I've got an idea, I want to do this project, people would say, good luck with that, let me know how it turns out.
Or go to Calgary.
Yeah, or good luck somewhere else. And now what I find is there's a culture that has evolved, and a community that is saying, hey, that sounds like a good idea. Do you need an investor? And you can't underestimate what that actually means to an entrepreneur, to actually take the idea, get traction behind it, figure out how to finance it, and do something with it. So when you ask me about where do I see us going as a city or as a province, well, I hope that it's building on this momentum that we have right now, carving out our own destiny and our own future, which we have been doing for the last number of years to great success. And building out a world-class winter city. Because I still think that the thing that we have not quite figured out is how to enjoy the winters, which a lot of Scandinavian countries have figured out. I don't know what their secret is, and we're doing a trip this summer to go and do a little bit of research, but I think that that's one of the things that's missing, because right now, I mean, I think of the starting point to every conversation I've had in the last 2 weeks, it starts with, oh, it's cold out there.
Yeah.
Did the car start, right? And somehow we have to figure out how to not just live in it, but find points throughout the winter, which last year was over 6 months, to actually celebrate it and celebrate that winter portion of it, because that really is half of our year here. And we can go down to Mexico for a while, but we can't completely escape that, most of us, right?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I've joked with a few people that imagine the budget our city would have if we didn't have to worry about the winter. Lots of cities have that luxury. We don't. We have 6 months of what Toronto thinks is a disaster today. The Arctic, the Arctic, whatever they're calling it, down in Toronto is called Tuesday. In Saskatchewan, we adapt and we move on. It goes forward. So it's been exciting for me to have you as a guest. You're a young entrepreneur. You really have a footprint, and you've really actually started. You're not that type of guy, but I'm going to float your boat for you. you've really changed the DNA of the city. And companies like you, and you mentioned Meridian, Carl Miller is on the board of the chamber, have really started doing some fantastic things in the city that our kids are going to be growing up in, and that's fantastic for me. So where do you see you going forward? Where do you see your business? Where are your opportunities? Where are you looking once you get back from Mexico? Because our winter is long, you want to take a break, I get it. We all want to go somewhere warm. Where do you see when you get back, what's your next 5-year horizon plan?
Interesting question, because I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I mean, when you look at what drives me, it has to do with lifestyle. It has to do with day to day. There were things that we left behind in Victoria that I didn't want to leave behind, and we've come back to Saskatoon and said, well, how do we bring that to life in Saskatoon so that we can enjoy it here? And when I think about what I'm doing for the next 5 years, like you mentioned, Carrie and I have 2 little guys right now, about this big and smaller. And our life right now is pretty much focused on building out our day-to-day in Saskatoon. And I just see myself doing many more projects in Saskatoon, probably, a lot of housing, investing into a lot of cultural events, and investing into festivals and things that will animate our city, because that's very important to my wife and I. That's part of what keeps us here, right? And so continuing to build out not just the strictly financial side of the business, but also the lifestyle side of what is helping keep us here. So yeah, it's just, I think more of the same, but with every project things seems to get bigger and I seem to need more staff to do it. So the next 5 years is just continued growth and continued grand opening celebrations and pouring enough wine and beer at things to really get them cooking.
We really thank you so much for coming. It's a privilege for me to have guests like you come that are entrepreneurial and really well spoken and tell a great story, but it's a privilege for the city of Saskatoon to have entrepreneurs that are young like you, that are focused on adding value to the city, but also not superficially either. You're focused on your family. Before we talked a little bit, and he said, look, I've been asked to be on not 1,000, you didn't say 1,000, but I'll say for television, 1,000 boards. And he said, I've turned most of them down because I realize I'm not going to take that away from work time. It's coming from family time. And that's really what I've noticed coming from Saskatoon, is this family community, this community that wants to work, wants to get paid for it, but also wants the balance of lifestyle and family. And it's a privilege for me as the host of this show to have a guest like you that's coming saying, look, I'm willing to work hard, but I'm also not willing to sacrifice my family. So Curtis, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.